Thanks, Tom, and thanks to the organizers. Many of you may have heard me this morning talking about the reimbursement strategy and reimbursement environment. I'm talking a little bit shifting gears here. I'm going to talk about the Alliance and what our regulatory agenda is and has been. And certainly invite anybody's participation. If you're not a member of our organization, you're certainly welcome to join, and we'd really love to have you. And there's certainly lots of opportunities for leadership on any of the issues that I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So I'm going to start with just a little bit about the Alliance. For those of you who don't know, we started in 2009 with 15 charter organizations, and from the beginning we were a multi-stakeholder group. So while we focus on translation and commercialization issues, we are not only comprised of industry members. We also have patient advocacy groups, academic institutions, clinical centers, and investors. And that was intentional because we wanted to represent the community in regenerative medicine, not just industry. So when we go talk to the FDA, for example, we are bringing the views of the community with us. And we have found that to be, by the way, incredibly useful. The FDA has commented to us about that numerous times, as has the U.S. Congress and other venues. So just really quickly, some of our goals. The big goal is the top one, which is we are advocating for a national strategy in the U.S. on regenerative medicine, which of course incorporates a regulatory environment that is conducive to research and commercialization of products that make sure that safe and effective regenerative medicine products reach the market as soon as possible. We also are working on some other projects which I'm going to talk about reference standards and best practices on cell characterization and things like that, financial models, and pharmacoeconomics, which we talked about some this morning. We do have a European affiliate. Rob Janssen, who is the executive director of the Alliance for Advanced Therapies, is here. He's going to be speaking later. I encourage you to stay for his talk. That started in a couple of years ago. The charter companies and institutions are listed. It's the same idea. It's a multi-stakeholder group. And it was launched in 2012, and the two organizations jointly participated in the Advanced Therapy Summit, which was the third annual Advanced Therapy Summit just recently in Barcelona, Spain, where we talked about issues of importance to companies in Europe and to the U.S., and then how we can work together. I should say that the AAT and the ARM work closely and coordinate closely, and so an example of that is if there's a proposed regulation or guidance in Europe, AAT members take the lead, but the U.S. ARM companies provide support and coordinate and often try to support the positions of our European colleagues. When there are regulatory issues or other issues in the U.S., the opposite is true. The U.S. Organization and companies take the lead, and the European companies provide support so that globally our industry is talking with a unified voice to regulators and other policymakers. So I mentioned that we started with 15 members in September of 2009. As of the beginning of this month, we have now 141 members and growing. So it's been remarkably successful, which is terrific. And you can see that, to the extent you can read it, we've got companies as well as, starting in the middle, is all the research institutions, investors, affiliates, patient advocacy groups, foundations. So you can see that we've really achieved our goal of having a multi-stakeholder group. I will say the one thing we are trying to do in the years ahead is not just expand our corporate membership, but really get more patient advocacy and foundation membership in the organization. The patient voice is critical to what we're doing, and we really see ARM as a vehicle for industry to collaborate with the patient advocacy community. We are also launching a foundation this month. We're about to file our papers with the IRS, The purpose of that is to provide educational support for the advocacy activities that the arm undertakes. So I listed some of the functions of this foundation. It is literally launching, so we still have to put together the board and really do all of that kind of work. But it was approved by the Alliance Board recently, and this is the kind of activities it's going to do. Be a clearinghouse for information on programs, publish papers, commission papers on pharmacoeconomics, and the like, because we really see those are the kinds of questions we get when we talk to FDA, or when we talk to Congress, or when we talk to insurers and payers, is they want to know where's all the background information about the field that supports all of these advocacy efforts, and that's what the foundation will do, as well as sponsoring conferences and seminars and other activities that will educate the public about regenerative medicine. So we define regenerative medicine quite broadly. So we think of it as all of these kinds of technologies that are transformative: cell therapy, tissue engineering, of course, devices like scaffolds, and drug discovery and small molecules and biologics. And in fact, we have companies in all of these spaces that participate in the work of the Alliance, gene therapy, cell-based immunotherapy, and the like. Structurally, we have committees that do all of our work, like a regulatory committee, for example, but we have what we are calling verticals, which are opportunities for the companies in each of those particular disciplines to get together and talk about common issues and common needs that they have, and that they can then advocate for within the umbrella of ARM. So, what's our regulatory agenda? This is kind of an overview slide of, from the beginning, what we wanted to accomplish on the regulatory side. That's basically speaking a predictable and an efficient review and approval process that enables approval of safe and effective products as quickly as possible. Right? I mean, that's basically it. That's, it's easy to say, a lot harder to accomplish, but that's really the objective that we're looking for. Does that mean using existing rules and modifying them? Does that mean we need a new regulatory structure somehow? That's kind of what we've been wrestling with the FDA. I think it's fair to say that the FDA's position on this has been that the existing regulatory framework that they have for biologics, for devices, and for drugs is sufficient for regenerative medicine products. While it may need some tweaking, their attitude is we don't need to create, for example, new pathways to market. So some of the other things we've been talking about with the agency is to increase coordination between federal agencies that are engaged in regenerative medicine. So the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Defense in the U.S., between the two of them, probably spend $1.5 billion on regenerative medicine research. We're pretty confident that there's virtually no coordination between them about what projects to fund. There's not even much coordination within the agencies about what projects to fund. And there certainly is very little coordination between them and the FDA that is trying to make sure that there's a solid scientific basis to review, evaluate, and approve regenerative medicine products. So we talk about improving the science base at the FDA. That's because when we met with the commissioner of the FDA about 2 years ago now, or early in the creation of ARM, she told us flat out that they're supposed to be a science-based agency that has trouble keeping up with the science. And if they can't keep up with the science, it's really hard for them to feel confident about approving products. So coordination between the agencies that are science agencies to work with the FDA and improving the science base at the agency itself are things that we've been working really hard to accomplish. Some other ideas about cross-cutting standards and tools to evaluate regenerative medicine products. I talked about communication between the various agencies. We also want to improve communication between the agency and industry, or perhaps in the whole regenerative medicine community. The various centers of the agency need to work better together, and all of that is designed to create a framework to help move products to patients as soon as possible. Now, our approach with the agency to accomplish all of this from the beginning has been a collaborative one. We have not taken the posture that, the FDA is either not competent or evil or any of those approaches. We have said we think that we've got to do this together, and we need to work with the FDA to try to create this regulatory process. And we have found this to be an enormously successful approach. And I'm going to talk about some of the specific projects we're working on, but you'll see that because we've created this trust relationship with FDA, they now go to us as a resource on these issues, and they now bring us to the table when they start talking about what the regulatory framework for regenerative medicine products in the future is going to look like. That started with our meeting with the commissioner, and with, for those of you who don't know, Celia, if you're not American, you don't know who Celia Whitten is. She runs the Office of Cell and Tissue and Gene Products at the FDA, and we have regular conversations with her and her team going forward. So one of the collaborative projects we worked on had to do with communication. We know that many cell therapy INDs end up on clinical hold, and this was actually documented in a paper that was published a few years ago, and the authors found basically that there were a lot of similarities between the INDs that ended up on hold, and they published this in the paper in Cytotherapy in 2008. And one of the things that we thought about was, okay, so if we know a lot of cell therapy products end up on clinical hold, that's a good place to start in terms of working with the agency to try to come up with some processes and policies that are going to help alleviate that problem and get these products to the market. One of the things that we talked about was that there was a lack of communication between sponsors and the agency. So we had a fascinating meeting with the FDA last year when several sponsors and company representatives sat at the table with all these folks from the Center for Biologics and said, we're really concerned because we find it hard to communicate with the agency in a timely way. And all the things, it's hard to get a response, it's hard to understand what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. So that was fine. The really interesting part was the FDA's response to that, which was, that's interesting because we have the same complaint about you. We think that it's really hard to communicate with sponsors. We don't feel like you listen when we talk. So it created this very interesting dynamic in the room, actually, where kind of both sides across the table were saying that it was hard to communicate with the other. And so what was clear was, well, now we know why there's a lack of communication between sponsors and the agency, because both sponsors and the agency are talking right past each other. So we mutually agreed at that meeting that what would really be helpful would be if the ARM would publish a paper that would help sponsors communicate effectively with the agency. The agency folks said, hey, look, we could write a guidance about this, but let's face it, that'll take us 5 years. It'll be so watered down by the time it gets published that it's going to be basically useless. So why don't you guys write this paper that helps sponsors understand the process? So what we did was we got input from all of the members of ARM, and then the best part is we sent drafts of this paper to the FDA and had them give us input to ensure technical accuracy and to make sure that it was appropriate. So the paper that got published in October of 2012 by us, which I'm happy to share with anybody, addresses issues for cell therapy and RM products, but really is broadly applicable. And really what it does is it goes from the pre-IND stage all the way through phase 3, all the opportunities you have to interact with the FDA and the best ways to do it. What kind of data you need to present, what should be the tone of the meeting, what you can expect from the agency in response to your request or from the meeting, are minutes taken, what opportunities do you have to amend your data, all of those things. And the best part is this was all reviewed and approved by the agency. So we know that what we're putting in this paper comes from, metaphorically, right, comes from the horse's mouth, that this is the way to be most effective. So it was a terrific opportunity and a great example of how we've been able to coordinate and collaborate with the agency on an issue that's really critically important to sponsors. Another project has to do with standards. When we met with the agency, they said to us that one of the big obstacles that they see to commercialization is the lack of standardization in the field. So we went about doing an inventory of all the public and private standards that are out there. We completed that. We did a gap analysis. Following that, we completed that. And now we've created working groups, which we're doing in conjunction with the ISCT, to essentially address key issues related to potency assay development and validation. And the plan is to publish these papers later this year and use those for workshops with US and European regulators. Again, our member companies identified cell potency and particularly cell potency assay development and validation as a huge challenge to commercialization. The FDA agreed with that and said that they struggle with this too. So now we're working on this project with them together so that we can agree on what those standards should be that will pass regulatory muster. That, in turn, led to the second bullet point. FDA has reached out to us. They are, this fall, going to have a workshop on cell characterization and cell processing, and they reached out to ARM to help them organize this workshop, set the agenda, and figure out who the invitees will be. They laid out the parameters. They wanted to be government agencies and private groups. But now we're working with them to fill that out so that it's really going to be a meaningful workshop for commercial sponsors. So it's another great example of the fact that we've worked with the agency. Now they're bringing us to the table in these small group settings to actually hammer out what the standards and what the regulatory framework should be on issues that are really important to us, like cell characterization and processing. We are also having a meeting with them in the fall on international regulatory harmonization. They've agreed, and the European regulators have agreed to participate. This will be in Washington in the fall, and we're going to talk about regulatory issues in Europe and in the US and how we can be better harmonized. So it's another great example of working with the agency directly to advance this field. We have regular meetings with them, as I mentioned. We also, of course, part of our regulatory agenda is submissions to the FDA public docket. We talked this morning about some of the PDUFA programs, about accelerated approval. There was also a program in that statute that requires FDA to develop new risk-benefit paradigms that include patient community views for new products. So we've been working with FDA about what that looks like because we know that it's supposed to target unmet medical needs. We know that cell therapy, regenerative medicine products are going to be part of that mix. So we're working with the FDA on that, on the other PDUFA provisions, regulatory reform issues. We've developed a white paper which we'll be publishing shortly about HCTP regulation. For those of you who don't know, the previous speaker talked about risk-based regulation. Well, we've got that in the US too. And so that's all about whether a product can get to market before you do clinical trials or not. Certain cell therapy products, or I should say certain cell products, cell and tissue products are allowed on the market in the US without clinical trials. Some are not. And we published a paper about kind of the distinction between those and what the regulatory standards should be. We're also working on preclinical issues like animal models, and of course we'll be delving into some of the regulatory issues with the other technologies as well. So I know that was a lot to sort of cram into a short talk, but I think you get the idea that we're really engaged in all of the regulatory issues that are confronting this sector. I encourage you to join our group. We'd love to have your ideas. If you're part of the ARM already, please participate in our regulatory committee and in our sessions, and you can see you'll get a lot out of it, and you'll be at the table with the FDA and potentially European regulators going forward. Thanks very much.